Welcome, listeners, to another enlightening episode of The Way of Hermes. I'm Jake, and joining me today is my co-host, Emily. We're diving into a fascinating topic that's at the heart of ancient wisdom traditions.
That's right, Jake. Today we're exploring the enigmatic figures of Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth. These names might sound mysterious to some of our listeners, but their influence on esoteric and philosophical thought is truly profound.
Absolutely, Emily. Let's start with Hermes Trismegistus. In ancient Greek religion, Hermes was known as the messenger of the gods. But he was much more than just a divine courier, wasn't he?
Indeed, Jake. Hermes was a multifaceted deity. He was the patron saint of borders and those who crossed them, like travelers and shepherds. But what's really interesting is how he was associated with human activities requiring sharp intelligence.
That's fascinating. So was Hermes seen as a purely benevolent figure?
Not exactly, Jake. Hermes was a patron of many positive pursuits: orators, poets, inventors, and athletes. But interestingly, he was also associated with more, let's say, morally ambiguous activities.
What kind of activities are we talking about?
Well, believe it or not, Hermes was also considered the patron of thieves and liars. It's a reminder that in ancient mythologies, gods often embodied the full spectrum of human nature, both the admirable and the less savory aspects.
That's a great point about the complexity of ancient deities. Now, let's shift gears a bit. How does Thoth fit into this picture?
Thoth is where things get really interesting, Jake. During the Hellenistic era, Hermes became associated with the Egyptian god Thoth. This association is crucial to understanding the figure of Hermes Trismegistus.
So Thoth wasn't just another name for Hermes. What made him distinct?
Thoth had his own unique identity in Egyptian mythology. He was considered the heart and tongue of the sun god Ra, essentially acting as Ra's communicator. But his role went far beyond that.
It sounds like Thoth had some pretty significant responsibilities. Can you elaborate on that?
Thoth's primary task was to maintain universal harmony. He did this by keeping good and evil in perfect equilibrium and by establishing the exact proportions of celestial bodies whose motions he governed.
Wow, talk about a cosmic balancing act. It's no wonder Thoth is often associated with moral law. But I've also heard that Thoth played a role in the afterlife. Is that correct?
You're spot on, Jake. In Egyptian mythology, Thoth had a crucial role in the judgment of the dead. He was the secretary of the gods, and one of his duties was to record the results when a deceased person's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at.
The feather of Ma'at? That's a new one for me. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Of course. Ma'at was the wife of Thoth and the goddess of justice. In the Egyptian concept of the afterlife, if the heart of the deceased was heavier than Ma'at's feather due to sins committed during life, the person would be found guilty and sentenced to hellish punishments.
That's quite a judgment system. It seems Thoth was not only maintaining cosmic balance, but also playing a key role in individual moral judgment. Were there any other areas where Thoth was considered influential?
Absolutely, Jake. Thoth was also revered as a great innovator. He was credited with inventing writing, the hieroglyphic alphabet, and was associated with science, religion, philosophy, and magic. It's hard to overstate his importance in Egyptian thought.
It's amazing how these ancient figures encompassed so many domains of knowledge and power. Now, bringing it back to Hermes Trismegistus, how does he fit into all of this?
Well, Jake, Hermes Trismegistus is essentially a syncretic blend of Hermes and Thoth. In the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of ancient wisdom texts, Hermes Trismegistus is portrayed as the one who brings divine revelation to humanity.
That's fascinating, Emily. It seems like Hermes Trismegistus combines the wisdom and roles of both Hermes and Thoth. But I'm curious, who receives these divine revelations in the Hermetic texts?
The recipients of Hermes Trismegistus's revelations vary throughout the Corpus Hermeticum. Sometimes it's Asclepius, other times it's Thoth, who is occasionally referred to as Hermes' son. Even King Ammon is mentioned as a recipient in some texts.
It sounds like there's a lot of variety in these texts. Are there any other interesting variations our listeners should know about?
There are some fascinating variations in the Corpus Hermeticum. For instance, in the first Hermetic treatise called Poimandres, it's not Hermes who brings the divine revelation, but a figure named Poimandres.
So Hermes isn't always the revealer in these texts?
Exactly. In fact, in Book 11 of the Corpus Hermeticum, the divine revealer is Nu, which represents the divine intellect. It shows how fluid and diverse these teachings can be.
I see. It seems like these texts are quite adaptable. Now, Emily, I'm curious about the content of these revelations. What kind of wisdom is Hermes Trismegistus or these other revealers sharing in the Corpus Hermeticum?
Well, Jake, the revelations in the Corpus Hermeticum cover a wide range of profound topics. Hermes Trismegistus typically brings divine revelations about the nature of God, the structure of reality, the cosmos, and the true nature of humanity.
Wow, those are some weighty subjects. It sounds like these texts are trying to answer some of the biggest questions in existence.
That's right. The Hermetic texts are essentially a blend of philosophical, religious, and esoteric teachings. They aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of the universe and our place in it.
It's amazing how these ancient texts grapple with questions we're still asking today. Do you think that's why they continue to fascinate people, even in our modern era?
The enduring appeal of the Hermetic teachings lies in their attempt to bridge the gap between the divine and the human, the cosmic and the personal. They offer a path to understanding that resonates with seekers of wisdom across ages.
Emily, you've given us a fantastic overview of Thoth's role in Egyptian mythology. I'm particularly intrigued by his association with moral law. Can you elaborate on how this ties into his role as the secretary of the gods?
Certainly, Jake. Thoth's role as the divine scribe goes hand in hand with his association with moral law. As the secretary of the gods, he was responsible for recording and maintaining the cosmic order. This included not just physical laws, but moral and ethical principles as well.
So in a way, Thoth was like a cosmic record keeper?
Exactly. And this role became particularly significant in the Egyptian concept of the afterlife. Thoth played a crucial part in the weighing of the heart ceremony, which was essentially a final judgment for the deceased.
The weighing of the heart ceremony. That sounds intense. Can you walk our listeners through what that entailed?
Of course. Picture this. In the Egyptian afterlife, the deceased's heart would be placed on one side of a scale. On the other side was the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order.
And I'm guessing the goal was for your heart to be as light as the feather.
Precisely, Jake. If the heart was heavier than the feather, it meant the person had lived an unrighteous life. But if the heart balanced with the feather, it indicated a life lived in accordance with Ma'at's principles.
And where does Thoth come into this process?
Thoth's role was crucial. He stood by the scales, recording the results of this weighing. His records would determine the fate of the deceased, whether they would be granted eternal life or face punishment.
Wow, talk about high stakes. It really emphasizes how seriously the ancient Egyptians took the concept of moral living.
And it's worth noting that this wasn't just about punishment. The whole concept was designed to encourage people to live ethically during their earthly lives.
It's remarkable how these ancient beliefs still resonate with modern ethical thinking. But I'm curious, Emily, how did people prepare for this final judgment?
Well, the Egyptians had a practice known as the negative confession. It was a list of 42 sins that the deceased would recite, claiming they had not committed them. This confession was believed to lighten the heart.
42 sins. That's quite a list. Can you give our listeners an example of what might be on it?
The list included things like, I have not stolen, I have not killed, but also more subtle ethical statements like, I have not stopped the flow of water, or I have not spoken in anger.
It's interesting how specific some of these are. It paints a picture of what the Egyptians valued in terms of moral behavior.
Exactly, Jake. And remember, Thoth was there, recording all of this. His role as scribe wasn't just about passive observation. It was an active part of maintaining cosmic and moral order.
This really highlights the depth of Egyptian spiritual beliefs. It's not just about gods and myths, but a complex system of ethics and personal responsibility.
You've hit the nail on the head, Jake. And it's this complexity and depth that made the Egyptian tradition, particularly the figure of Thoth, so influential in later esoteric and philosophical thought.
We've talked about Thoth's role in maintaining cosmic balance and his association with moral law, but I'm curious about his other contributions. You mentioned earlier that he was credited with some significant inventions. Can you elaborate on that?
Thoth wasn't just a cosmic judge and scribe. He was also revered as a great innovator and the source of much of ancient Egyptian knowledge. One of his most significant contributions was the invention of writing and the hieroglyphic alphabet.
The invention of writing essentially marks the beginning of recorded history, doesn't it?
Exactly, Jake. By attributing the invention of writing to Thoth, the Egyptians were essentially crediting him with the ability to preserve knowledge across generations. This was seen as a divine gift, a way to transcend the limitations of oral tradition.
I can see why that would be so important. Were there other areas where Thoth was considered influential?
Indeed, there were. Thoth was also associated with science, religion, philosophy, and magic. He was seen as the source of all knowledge, both sacred and secular. In fact, many ancient Egyptian scientific and religious texts were said to have been written by Thoth himself.
That's fascinating. It seems like Thoth was the go-to deity for anything related to knowledge and wisdom. How did this aspect of Thoth influence the later concept of Hermes Trismegistus?
Great question, Jake. When Hermes and Thoth were syncretized into Hermes Trismegistus, all of these attributes associated with knowledge and wisdom were carried over. This is why Hermes Trismegistus is often portrayed as the ultimate sage, the keeper of all secret knowledge.
I see. So, in a way, Hermes Trismegistus became a symbol of the pursuit of higher knowledge and understanding.
Exactly. In the Hermetic tradition, Hermes Trismegistus is seen as the mediator between the divine and human realms, bringing celestial wisdom down to earth. This role perfectly combines Hermes' function as a divine messenger and Thoth's association with wisdom and knowledge.
It's amazing how these ancient concepts have such relevance to modern spiritual and philosophical thought. Do you think this is why the figure of Hermes Trismegistus continues to fascinate people today?
The idea of a divine figure who can bridge the gap between the mundane and the spiritual, who holds the keys to ultimate knowledge, that's a powerful and enduring concept. It speaks to our eternal quest for understanding the mysteries of existence.
I can definitely see the appeal. Now, I'm curious about how these ideas were transmitted. You mentioned the Corpus Hermeticum earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about these texts and their significance?
Of course. The Corpus Hermeticum is a collection of Greek texts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, although they claim to be much older. These texts are presented as dialogues, usually involving Hermes Trismegistus, imparting wisdom to a student.
And what kind of wisdom are we talking about here? What sorts of topics do these texts cover?
The Corpus Hermeticum covers a wide range of esoteric and philosophical topics.
How influential were these texts historically?
Incredibly influential. During the Renaissance, when these texts were rediscovered and translated into Latin, they caused quite a stir. Scholars and philosophers of the time believed they were reading the words of an ancient Egyptian sage who predated Moses.
That must have given these texts a lot of authority. How did this impact Renaissance thought?
It had a profound impact. The Hermetic texts influenced many Renaissance thinkers and played a significant role in the development of Western esoteric traditions. They helped spark interest in alchemy, astrology, and what we might today call occult sciences.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hermetic Dialogues, the official podcast of the Way of Hermes website. If you are interested in free articles on Hermeticism and related topics or want to study this ancient tradition through our online course, be sure to visit our website at wayofhermes.com.